fun objects. Any questions from arrays from yesterday? Like core questions like, oh, like how does arrays work? Like what are some big things? Or do we feel pretty comfortable with arrays by now? Yeah, or just more practice? More practice. Okay,
What
great.
if you have arrays within arrays within arrays?
Isn't that like
Cool.
array?
Yes, it's allowed. Yeah.
I think I kind of asked you this other day, but like, so you said a grid doesn't necessarily need to have like arrays within arrays, like is a grid.
Yeah.
Essentially. So like that's how we should think about it. We shouldn't think of it why is it a grid? Like if that's not how we should be thinking.
It's a grid because it has X number of rows, and each row has a finite number of or of elements, which could form a column.
No, I
right.
understand that, but like when we were looking at it the other day, you said we didn't need to our output didn't have the actual
right.
breaks, you know. So is it actually a grid?
Or
is it just a big array with multiple arrays within it? Is that the same thing?
So the reason why I think grids inherently are really useful is because they help you kind of represent things in a graphical way, right?
Okay,
there's an X number of X coordinates, X number of Y coordinates, and you're able to kind of pinpoint specific locations, right? When I give you a list of coordinates, it doesn't matter how it's presented, as long as you know what those coordinates are. Spatially, you know where the things are also, right? So a lot of times, especially when we do things with programming, it's like it matters a lot less what the human sees, and more that the computer has the inherent right values, right? So let's say we were doing a really complicated calculation, right? And let's say the computer rounds everything, it shows us down to 3 decimal points, right? It matters less that we see 3 decimal points. It matters a lot more that the computer inherently knows it's a much more complex number, and it has everything else kind of on its own backend. So with grids, somewhat related to that is the idea that with a grid, you're representing things in a fundamental way that is correct, right? So whether or not the grid kind of each row prints on its own lines is moot relative to the fact that each row's values are accurate. And so if I was to I think the example I gave was if I had a chessboard, right? And let's say I want to a human, it might need to be an 8x8 square, right? All the pieces are configured a certain way. If I gave a computer a chessboard and it was just one long row of 64 squares in a row, and a computer can process that correctly, the computer will still know what the parameters of the boards are, where the pieces are, and kind of what the game is like, right? So in that way, it matters a lot less what the human sees. The more important thing is the computer has an accurate representation of what the grid is, right? So when we talk about kind of using arrays for grids, don't think that the only value of grid is, oh, when I console log it out, it looks nice to a human. The actual value is, hey, I can create a Sudoku puzzle, for example, and a computer can help me check to see if each row, each column, and each 3x3 square, has every digit, right? And that's independent of how it prints out. It's more related to the fact the computer actually knows where the rows are, where the columns are, and where the boxes are.
Does a grid mean that every single array within the array has the same amount of elements?
That's dependent on the user for the most part, right? If a user wants to have, if they want to, have a grid in which the first, X number of rows have 5 columns, right? And the next 5 rows have 10 columns, that's up to the user, right? But using arrays, we can create a grid, so to speak, that accurately captures that kind of a board, right? So it's not so when we say grid, it's just more, it's less of let's print out this picture perfect square, and it's more hey, look, using arrays, I can effectively create something that it proxies for a graph, right? With arrays, I don't need to draw anything. I can just make arrays that capture that data form pretty accurately. Yeah, so console logs matters a lot less to us for the most part. They're useful when you're learning, but once you understand kind of what's happening behind the scenes, it's you can make it pretty if you want, but it's also very very rarely in your job where your job is oh, make the console logs look really pretty, right? Usually it's oh, once the computer has the right data, you're good to go. Okay. Anything else?
Thanks for that.
Yeah, no.
One with the grids, so the elements within the big array represents the columns or the rows?
The elements within the big arrays, usually they represent the rows.
The rows, right? And then the arrays within each element represents the columns.
Yeah, we can think that way. It's it's almost if I take a word for you, right? If I print it horizontally, it's the word, right? If I printed like one character in each like row, so to speak, and I print it vertically, it's still the same word, right? Like I can show it to you however you want. Visually, I can represent you however you like, but at the end of the day, it's still like that same word, right? And so this is the same idea. It's like I can print it out, I can show it to you like visually however you want it to be, but like at the end of the day, like it's still like the same thing, right? So once again, like it matters a lot less kind of like how it looks and more like what data is it trying to capture and is it accurate? Is it accurately reflecting that, right? Otherwise, if we didn't use nested arrays, and I was like, hey, like I want to represent the corners of a tic-tac-toe board or a Sudoku box, how would you do it? And the short answer is there's actually not like that easy of a way to say like, all right, do I create like if I want to create an 8x8 grid, do I create like 64 variables and then like like for each variable I like assign it a value? Like it just gets really messy really quickly, right? Arrays kind of is a more user-friendly way to do that. And when we print it out, like we print out on each line more to show you to say like, hey, like conceptually this is what's happening, but like to a computer like that doesn't matter at all, right? The computer's like I can read one long row of 64 columns, doesn't matter to me, right? But to a human, it just makes it a little bit easier to understand. Any other questions on arrays, especially in terms of kind of using the built-in array functions? That's something that like will most likely definitely that's something that will be on the assessment. I'm like pretty confident. Like they usually have like kind of problem categories. We'll talk more about what those are near the end of the week. But like knowing how to use arrays, pull, push, splicing, like those are kind of really fundamental to just kind of being comfortable with arrays. Like those are almost, I would say, a lot more important in terms of other than just like, oh, like how do nested arrays look, right? Like nested arrays are more kind of like a sub thing on the side. But with core arrays, it's just like, do you know how to add, edit, delete, use arrays? Yeah.
I'm just curious as in like general, like do you come across using the methods more, or more like the assignments at the beginning to avoid using the methods? Sorry. I was just curious, like, would we come across trying to avoid using the methods more, or is it usually pretty straightforward in using the methods? I'm phrasing this really weirdly. Like, how often would we come across a situation where they explicitly say not to use the method?
Oh, you would never come across a certificate not to use a method. Like we only ask you not to use a method. Like, sorry, I think the question is like, like when we want you to write like dot includes, we say don't use dot includes, right? That's just pure like a teaching thing, right? The idea is we want you to know how like dot includes works because you've built it yourself, so that rather than just like kind of being like like there's in programming there's this like phrase called cargo culting, which isn't directly applicable here, but the idea is like you copy code that you don't kind of know how it works, you just assume it does, which is fine in like 99% of the cases. But then when there's an edge case, it really helps to know kind of how things are working behind the hood or underneath the hood. And so you will very, very rarely get a problem if we say like, don't use this particular method. It's just for these ones, because we're trying to teach you how to use these methods, we don't want you to just like, oh, I built includes, I just use the built dot includes. Like, well, it's kind of a moot point, right? Yeah. Okay, so on objects. We're doing 2 days of objects, just like we did 2 days of arrays. So the first 2/3 of today's slides I'll go through pretty quickly because they should be a lot of it should be review, especially from your pre-work. And then the last third we're going to introduce some newer concepts. So I'll slow down a bit more there. Okay, what is an object? The short answer is in JavaScript we call it an object a collection of key value pairs. Objects exist in almost all languages. In Python, it's called a dictionary. And I actually like that term a little bit better, especially when we're first learning about objects, because I think it kind of translates really well to this idea of how people think about dictionaries, especially, right? So when we say in JavaScript, when we say a key value pair, in a dictionary, like colloquially, it's just like a word and a definition, right? It's like a dictionary is a collection of word definition pairs, right? So that literally transliterates over to an object as a collection of key value pairs. So the word is a key, and the value is a definition, or the value is what's associated with that key. Okay, and then right. So rather than having indexes, which we saw with arrays, object has keys, and then the values are correspondingly there as well. Notice how this is just like something to keep in the back of mind. Keys and whereas indexes and arrays are always numbers because they're positions. Indexes and objects are always strings. Always strings. You cannot have a boolean as a key, right? You can't have an object or an array as a key. Okay, almost like in a dictionary, like the word almost has to be like alphabetical, right? The definition can have numbers. The definition can have pictures. The value can be whatever you want. The value on this side can be an array, a boolean, whatever you want. Anything's fair game, right? But for the key, it has to be a string. A lot of times, if you pass something that's not a string, JavaScript actually converts it into a string for you on your behalf, whether or not you intend to. So just kind of keep in the back of your mind, keep note that JavaScript is very strict in that keys have to be strings. Okay, and we'll see kind of how that plays into how we use objects down the road a little bit as well. And then lastly, we in the same way that with an array we use a square bracket and we pass an index. With an object, we literally use the same exact square bracket notation, except in this case we pass in a string with the key, right? So basically in this case we're looking for a string called key1. We have a string called key1. If I was to go to a dictionary and I say, hey, what's the value of key1? What's the definition of key1? The dictionary would give me back what? Value 1, the definition, etc. Right? So like a dictionary would not give you back the word, right? You'd be like, hey dictionary, like what's the definition of key1? It wouldn't say it's key1. It would say, oh, it's value 1, right? So when I call this, just note that this doesn't give you back value 1, right? It's almost like you wouldn't go to a dictionary not knowing the word and only looking for a definition first. Like usually when you use objects, you go in with the key in mind to figure out what the value for that key is. Okay. Oh, whoops. One more. Too much. Okay. So why do we use objects? Really, the short answer is just like if I use an array for everything, right? It's like remember how yesterday when we were doing the zoo inventory problem? Like if I use an array for things, right? It's like if I looked at the values, I can probably guess that the first thing in the array is the animal's name. The second thing in the array might be like the species. The third thing might be the age. But really, that's also a lot of just like inferences on my part, right? In the same way that if a dictionary could just be a collection of random words and their definitions, right? It doesn't have to be sorted alphabetically, but it just makes it a lot more difficult to use. So the reason why objects are really useful is because it's almost like a very practical, very handy way of kind of aggregating and organizing, almost random information, right? As in, I can have a bunch of random information and I can associate some metadata, some context to each data, right? And so usually how that looks is you would have let's say I want in this case I have a cat called Bushin, right? If I wanted to figure out what the characteristics of this cat are, well, if I want to know the name of it, I would just have a name key, right? And the value for that name key would be the actual name of the cat, right? And so when I look at this now, this is just a lot more clear and concise to the user than this, right? The data is the exact same, but when I look at this, it's like, this is the name, but is it the cat's name? Is it the owner's name? Is it like a nickname? Whatever it is, I don't know. When I look at this, now I'm actually able to associate some kind of metadata, some kind of context to machine. Say, oh, this is name, 7 is age, gray and tabby is the color, right? So objects just really, the main benefit of objects is, or one of the main benefits of objects is that they actually let you just organize data really well. And because of this, objects are super, super, super common in the real world. Almost always, if you're going to any website and you're fetching data back, it's going to come back in the form of an object, right? And the reason for that is because objects lets you store whatever kind of data you want. It becomes this kind of very open, very fluid dumping ground for information. A lot of times, if you were to go to a website and make a request, right? If you go to Facebook, for example, you're like, hey, get me my data. Facebook will give you back this in something called JSON, or basically a JavaScript object notation, right? Or basically like an object saying okay, you wanted this data. Name is this. Maybe friend list is this, right? Last check-in date was this, etc. Like objects just really kind of give you really good context for a lot of data. And then lastly, type of for object. It says it gives you object, but once again, just it's not. It's yesterday we also saw that when we did that with arrays, it also gave you back an object too. So this will work, but like typically speaking, for the most part, testing whether or not something is an object is a little bit strange. Like almost like checking if it's like something else actually would be a lot more useful. If you have to check to see if something is an object, in most cases there's actually not like that good a reason to, because objects are kind of like the default thing that like all non-primitives are at the end of the day. So it's kind of like the catch-all. This is just kind of just let you know that this will give you back object, but just be careful when you use it because depending on kind of what you're filtering for. Creating an object. We use the curly braces to create objects. Literally, it's that simple. If you want to define it, right, we use a curly brace, and then it becomes a collection of key value pairs or word definitions, however you want to say it. It's always going to be key, colon, value, comma, right? It's about a comma separated key value pairs. Notice how here there's no quotes around this name key, around this page key, around this color, right? We could put quotes in there too, and it's totally fine. It wouldn't break. That's very valid, right? A lot of times people write it without quotes. Why? Because once again, keys can only be strings, right? So it's almost like we save ourselves in trouble typing the quotes because whether or not the quotes are there doesn't matter. JavaScript is going to make that into a string for you. So that's why sometimes we see the keys with quotes, sometimes without it. The computer doesn't care, but that's the reason why. And yeah, I mean, even though the keys are always strings, the values can be whatever we want it to be. And then accessing a value, once again, it's just like accessing the value of an array, except now instead of passing in the index or the number, the position, we just pass in the key. Here, we have to put quotes around the string, and we'll talk about why that is in like 2 more slides. But for now, let's just go with this. But yeah, we access it with bracket notation the same way we access it for arrays. And then whenever we try to access something that's not an existing key value pair, very much like when we access an index that doesn't exist in an array, right? If I have an array of 5 things and I say, give me the 20th thing, I get back undefined. Same idea here. If I go to an object and I try to access a key that doesn't exist, the value is going to be undefined. So it won't throw an error for better or worse. It's just going to say undefined. Okay. Any questions so far? Yeah.
I just want to clarify something before we move on. Is using Pusheen example, are keys the metadata part, the name, age, color part, or is it the whole thing, name, Pusheen, age 7, color, grid?
The key is name. The value is Pusheen.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yep. Anything else? Are we good? All right. So let's move on. Here's where things probably start get a little bit more confusing, unfortunately. Okay, so earlier I said we have to put quotes around, like when we use bracket notation to access a key, we have to put quotes around the key, right? And the reason why is because quotes tell us that it's a string. Because without quotes there, we can also put in a variable. In this case, on line 10 there, we define this variable called key to check, and we set it equal to a string called name. So we can also very easily pass in this variable as the key, so to speak, into the bracket notation as well. Or we can even make an operation, right? In this case, we're adding 2 strings together. So to a computer, in the order of operations, it would evaluate this first, and that would get us color, this string called color, and then it would pass that in as a key to look for. So using bracket notation, we can also very easily use variables. And that's super critical for us when we talk about kind of how do we like iterate through an object, so to speak. Yeah, Tyler?
Really quickly, those quotation marks on line 10 for name,
Yep.
Is that required or we don't need them?
No, that's required because
Okay.
otherwise we wouldn't know if name is a variable or a string.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, this is something else that we're going to talk about because you'll see it. I'm I'm always like a little bit torn on whether you should almost like not use this for the workshops. I'll talk about why after we talk about what it is. Okay, so bracket notation allows you to access keys, right, in an object. There's also another way to access keys using something called dot notation. Dot notation basically operates almost like a function, right? The way that we call like a function on an array. We just do object dot and then the name of the key, right? Notice how in this case there's no quotes around name and there's no quotes around age, right? And it's because even though this looks like a variable, because we're trying to access a key on an object, JavaScript kind of says, well, the only thing it could possibly be would be a string, right? Like it's not going to be a variable. It's not going to be something else. It can only be a string. And so if I want to access a name key on this Pusheen object, I do Pusheen.name. That's effectively the same thing as doing Pusheen bracket notation string name, right? And basically this just means that whatever dot whatever, that whatever is going to be converted into a string before we look for it. So it's making that assumption for us. The reason why people like it is because it looks very clean, right? Like it looks very simple, and I think it's a little bit more human intuitive. The reason why I don't like people using it is a few things. This also has limitations, right? Because so the biggest limitation here is just that, well, if I know that this has to be a string, right? JavaScript will convert it into a string for me. What does that not allow me to do then? Right. It doesn't let me look up keys by variable names, right? So even though here, look on line 9, we create this variable called key to check, and it's set equal to name. On line 14 there, when I do Pusheen.key to check, it's not saying, oh, let me look what the variable for key to check is. It is literally looking for a key called key to check, right? Like it is making that assumption for me here and making this key to check into a string and looking for that, which is why on line 14 we get back undefined. It's because key to check, as far as we can tell, doesn't exist on this object. So that's one limitation, is we can't use variables. The other limitation of this is that if there's any special characters or spaces in the key name, I also can't do that, right? Like I can't do like if I say age tomorrow, like age space tomorrow as a key, that could technically speaking be a valid key, right? It is a string after all, but there's no way for me to really type that using dot notation. So while dot notation looks simpler and more elegant, there are limitations when you use it and those things you can't access with dot notation, which is why like I would almost say for the workshops today, like just try using bracket notation for the most part, because like once you're really comfortable with bracket notation, it becomes easier to pick up dot notation. Whereas if you're just learning kind of everything at once, I don't want you to get too hung up on like using dot notation and not having it work the way that you want to. I've seen enough cohorts like really struggle with using dot notation when there's no need to. And we talk about like looping over objects. When you loop over an object, you usually use a variable, right? And they use dot notation for that, and so like it just becomes like a headache that takes a while to figure out. And in my mind, like this doesn't offer anything that bracket notation doesn't offer. In fact, this offers less. So I would encourage you to use bracket notation for tonight's workshop problem. And then tomorrow, once you feel more comfortable with objects, feel free to use dot notation instead. But yeah, this also does the same thing. It just looks a little bit prettier. Okay, adding a key value pair in an object. Literally, it is as simple as adding something or not adding something to an array. Actually, no, adding something to an array, right? Like we have an object. We use whatever notation we want, dot or bracket notation. We say, hey, for this key, the value is this, and now this will just add it to the object. If we're okay, and then yeah, so there we go. Like once we do that, we added those two values, and they show up in the object right away. And then sorry guys, this is really sensitive. Okay. And then here we see where we have Pusheen, it's an object. We have name, age, color. And then if I say age equals 8, what that does is that basically overrides the previous value of age with whatever new value I just gave it. And then I can obviously also change that value as well. In this case, I'm using ++ to just increment that number by 1. So now I have the age of 9. So once again, like if you imagine for the most part JavaScript reading code top down, if I define a value on line 1 and I define another value on line 2 and then the same key, the second value just overrides the first one, right? Much like an array. If I say array index 0 equals 1, array index 0 equals 2, well, the 2 just overrides the 1, right? So much like how in a dictionary, every word is unique, you won't have like multiple same words. In an object, you won't have multiple same keys. If you ever had that, well, you can't have that. If you try to do that, JavaScript will just override the previous value with the latest value. Yes, Emily.
What would happen if you had multiple values, like for age, and then you did the age plus plus? Would it increase each of those values by 1?
Would define multiple values.
So say, or less, instead of like age, it was like, like favorite number.
Sure.
Like 7, 10, 11.
So that's not a value though, right? Like 7, 10, 11 are 3 values.
Right. So I'm saying if it has multiple values and you did, like you told the key to increase by 1, like you did there, age plus plus, would each of those numbers increase by 1?
In JavaScript, you can't really have multiple values. You can only have like one thing. So you have an array with 3 values in it, but that's still a single value with 3 things.
Oh, I thought you could, for the keys, I thought you could have multiple values under each key. So you could do like, if you could create like a grocery list and vegetables, and vegetable would be a key, and then you would do like cucumber, lettuce, or is that not right?
Well, so I guess up until now we've kind of covered all the major like data types, right? Like so it's like string, booleans, numbers, and then arrays. Like multiple like we haven't like there really aren't this like sorry. We can't just throw like multiple values like randomly, right? Like they all need to be contained somewhere as like one entity. Like so far none of our problems or rather have you seen like an example of multiple values before in any of the workshop problems?
I feel like I read it in Eloquent JavaScript because they give an example of this guy who's trying to figure out why he's turning into a squirrel. It's really random.
Cool.
And so he creates an object that allows him to develop keys and I don't know. But I felt like he provided for example, like one of the he would track his activity for the day, and so there's a key called activity, and one of the activities would be like he went to the store, he read a book, he ate peanut butter. So to me, that's like there's multiple values under the key activity.
Did he store that? Did he store each of those activities? Did he store those activities in an array or an object?
It was in the key. Is that not right?
It was in the key. Okay, so let's think about how this will look then. So let's just say I have this. We'll call it squirrel equal, right?
Yeah.
And then I have something called activity, right?
Right.
Okay. And then what do I type here?
And it would be a string.
Okay.
And so it would be like grocery shopping.
Sure.
Or, yeah, exactly.
Running and walking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this will throw an error because this is not like valid JavaScript, right?
Oh.
Like this. So one of the things about JavaScript that we've seen so far is like we've actually been pretty stringent on this idea of containing things, right? Like we make it like we don't care where the closing curly brace is on a function in terms of like how much white space is around it, but there has to be one, right? Like we can just have like an open in a container, right? So with JavaScript, like everything's container is very, very clearly defined, right? So when I have something like this here, where it's just like 2 strings consecutively, this is not valid because the idea is like, okay, like what is that exactly? Like I know JavaScript knows what 1 string is, right? JavaScript doesn't know what 2 strings are.
Right. Okay. That
Right.
makes sense.
So like the only way to do this would be to do something like this, where we make this into an array.
Okay. Yes. Then it was definitely an array.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. So if it's an array, and I tried. So back to your earlier example, if this was let's say we'll call it like fave number.
Yeah.
And this was like let's say this is 5 and this is 6, right?
Yeah.
In this case, if you try to do fave number plus plus, what do you think is going to happen?
it would increase each number by what?
Dot. I'll use dot, but just don't do what I do. Okay, what do you think's gonna happen here? So you say increase both numbers by 1. Any other thought? Or how many people agree with Emily? Raise your hands. So 2. Okay. What do the other 20 of you think?
It might just add 7.
It might. Okay, so let's do a quote here. Okay, so add 1 to both numbers, and then we have 2 people, and then you're saying is add 1 to one number, right? How many people think it will add 1 to only 1 or 2 numbers? Raise your hands. 2 again. I'm gonna assume you raise your hand for that. That's right. You're the raise your hands.
Like I meant like it will insert another.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Add new number to array. Add new number to array. How many people think that? All right. Well, you lost your one supporter there. Okay. There's 20 of you here, so there's 17 other people. So I'd love to hear what the 17 of you got. 17 of you, I think. Eric, what's up?
Throw an error.
Throw an error. What kind of error?
Type error.
Did you just guess an error type?
Yeah.
Think about the error type. Well, Alice, someone else can. So I won't accept throw an error as an answer unless you can like tell me what the error type's gonna be, right? Because that's like saying like, oh, it won't work, but it's like like it's too ambiguous.
So I'm thinking that. Oh wait, never mind. Yeah.
Okay,
That's
Patricia.
Yeah. Fine.
I'm not really sure how to explain it with my vocabulary, but I think that because it's an array, you have to go inside in plus plus.
Okay.
When you're plus plussing, you're looking at this whole array, but it has elements in it.
Uh-huh.
So you'd have to go inside in plus plus if you wanted to add in one of the numbers.
So what will happen
There's
if I
gonna be
run
an
this?
error because it's like a group that you're trying to plus plus
So-
instead of just individual characters.
So what kind of error would that give? Okay, Emily?
Is not a number there?
No, not a number is a valid number type in JavaScript. It's kind of one of those like weird quirky things where not a number is technically a number, but yeah.
Unexpected operation or something? You can't really plus array.
Okay, I'll take that. Unexpected operation is an error. How many think unexpected operation? All right, you voted twice, Patricia. It's not allowed.
Oops.
All right,
Change my vote.
sure. So this is 4. Sorry, Emily. Okay,
I'm
there's 14 other people here. Kevin, what do you think?
I'm not sure what type of error it's going to go. I think it's going to be an error, but I'm not sure.
Okay, Julia? Type error? Why do you think it'll be a type error? Sorry, what did you say?
I thought I said that.
Well, so, I mean, error or an error, Julia. Why type error?
Because you can't add a number to an array.
Can't add number to an array. Okay.
Because an array is an array, not a number.
Well, type error is when the value is equal to the expected type, and it's expecting one number to add to. But when you have an array, you don't just have a single number that you're adding to. You're using the system itself.
Okay. Cool. That makes sense. How many people think type error?
Let's move my vote to type error.
It's like the same 5 people voting every time. It is change your votes like
Yeah,
every.
change your vote.
I know. I can tell. Like this is now at 0, and then this is at like 4 now. Cheyenne, what do you think?
Is reference error one of them?
Reference error is an error. Yes.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's a reference error?
Because it's. I'm not sure I know the definition of reference well, but it's like. It's referring to two numbers in one key or one object. I'm not really sure.
Reference errors usually only come up when when you're trying to use something that doesn't exist or has not been defined yet.
Well,
I'm sorry?
it's not defined correctly.
Okay. Alright, Gerson?
Not a number.
It's not an error though.
Well, when you're trying to add to an object, you're going to say it's
Not a number is JavaScript's way of saying, hey, like this is not a valid number type, but your operation succeeded still. So what do you think is gonna like? I guess I'm trying to say that like you can say that like it will do something with not a number, but not a number inherently is not like an error. It's not an it's not like a result. I guess. Yeah, Tyler.
Could be crazy, but is it possible that it adds another array?
Adds another array of what?
Big number is an array right now.
Yep.
So when we plus, I feel like it would add another array with 5, 6 in it.
Okay. All right, let's just close up. How many would think reference error? Cheyenne, do you think reference error still?
Me?
Yeah.
I'll stick to it.
All right, good. And then how many would think adds another array? 2. Okay. All right, we're still at like half of you all. So now we're less than half. It's like real American democracy. All right. Ta-da.
Oh,
Actually, hold up.
Chris was right.
Wait. Let me
Because I have to
That
return.
makes sense.
Wait, did I? Not a number?
Yeah.
That's how it came back? Wait. Sorry.
No, feel free to ask it. So what happened here?
I was going to say it was not a number because it's not a number. It can't add +1 to something that's not a number.
So I guess I think you and Gert's are on the right track. I think the answer that I wanted you to say was it replaces the pre-existing value with not a number.
Yes.
And that's like a very well. So because
Okay. Oh, I see.
if you say not a number, it's like it could change the inside of the array to not a number. It could like just like throw back like not a number. But what it's doing is it's actually keeping the object intact still. It takes a previous value and replaces it with another value.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay. So I mean, I guess like this actually be a fun thing for you guys just like Google on your own time to kind of fall into like this rabbit hole of trying to figure out why this happened. But I guess the most important thing here to realize is twofold, right? One is in production or in like real life code. This is why tests exist, right? Is because whenever you do anything like this, it's like I think everyone, and by everyone I mean like maybe 30% of you, like was like, oh, this will probably throw an error, right? Because it sounds kind of illogical, right? Like this doesn't make sense to us. But it's not necessarily how a computer might like try to work around it, right? Because ultimately a computer's job is also kind of hard too because it wants to be like bulletproof, but if it's too stringent, like it also makes it really hard for humans to use. So computers sometimes take some liberties and really try to figure out, okay, like I think this is what the user wanted to do, so I'm trying my best to do it for them. So one, this is why tests exist, and two, at the very least, like I guess at a high level, like what we can say here is, if we're just gonna be really specific, like understanding, like expecting an error, like so everything down these three are totally reasonable, but like I guess like the more unreasonable one is to expect that we would go into the array and do something every element of the array, right? Like that's like that's just like not really like in the realm of possibility for JavaScript, right? Like an array, once again, just like how I had that thing with that conversation with Emily, right? It's like an array is one thing, right? Unless we go into that thing, an array is just one thing, and once again, like intuitively, array plus plus makes no sense. What does it mean to add like the number 1 to a list? Right? It's like if I give you a grocery list of 5 things you want to buy from the store and say, by the way, add 1 to it, you're like, what? Like it just doesn't make sense, right? So intuitively, we should already know that despite whether or not this throws an error or not a number or does anything else wonky, like this is just not like a valid, like this is not a this is an operation that if you see, you should be like, wait, what? Like there's no realm in which that's going to give you like a right answer in terms of like what you were expecting. But yeah, this is fun. Yeah, Claire.
This might not be a useful question, by which I mean this might not
Let's
be
try
like, a useful way to think about it.
Sure.
But I'm trying to get at why it returned not a number rather than type error. So like, how do we tell when it's going to replace the value with something else that returns an error, rather than just say, but I can't do this to that kind of value?
The short answer is like, the short answer is like, for these kind of problems, it'll be a lot easier for you to add tests to your code than it is to memorize like the literally like thousands of like different errors plus operation like combinations, right? I'm not saying that to discourage you from doing so. It's just like you know, like it's like there's so many edge things of way things could break in unexpected ways that like it's like memorizing that probably wouldn't help you that much, to be quite honest, right? Instead, it'd probably be a good thing is after you like change the scroll thing, just do a quick check, like is every data type, like is name still a string, right? Is favorite number still an array, or favorite number still a number, or kind of thing, right? So yeah, that would probably be a lot more useful. Yeah.
So the double plus sign is basically saying look at something and whatever that number currently is, go up by one. So
Yeah.
Looking at the array and saying this is not a number.
Yeah. I guess I can't do that. Never mind. I'm sorry. It's yeah.
Because I was sort of trying to do a thing replicate, just saying plus one.
Oh, like plus or equal.
And that.
Plus or equal 1, like that.
Yeah. So that's kind of wonky, right?
Yeah. Why does that happen?
Concatenating it, right?
You can concatenate a 1 to the second element of the array. No, I turned the whole thing into a string.
Whoa! How did that happen? So weird. Yeah, Dimitri.
I just checked a couple of things. So in this case, it would do that.
Yes, it does.
Plus, if it's variable, it's gonna give you none.
Sorry, if it's a variable.
If it's a variable, like this way, and you just do plus plus, it's gonna give you an n.
Okay.
Number. But if you try to do like directly to the array, like literally do array plus plus, it will give you reference error.
Oh, you mean something like this? Something like
Like 5, 6.
Right. This will give you a reference error. Does it? Don't think it does. It definitely wouldn't give you a reference error, because a reference error means the array doesn't exist. Whoa. It wouldn't give you a reference error.
Well, I was
The
like,
un-
logging it.
Ah, god damn it. Invalid left-hand side and postfix operation. Ugh, it's so annoying. Okay. Yeah, honestly, this is not relevant to our discussion on objects. So I'm just gonna kind of back off from this. The short answer here is just, once again, right, the two things to memorize. Okay, don't be so like worried about like why the plus plus does what it's doing right now. Just know that, you know, plus plus to an array is just in your mind. Train yourself to think, hey, that makes no sense, right? Like even if it doesn't throw an error, that makes no sense. And then secondly is, this is why tests exist, and a lot of times it's easier to check things to make sure they aren't broken, as opposed to memorize all the answers to be like, oh, like this is whether this works this way or not. Patricia or some.
Yeah, if we did, quickly,
Yep.
come back to it, but if we did want to add a 1 to each of those 5 and 6,
we would need to loop over the array. Yep.
You can loop over the array using phase num as the key.
Yep. So we'll do something like let's say num equal 1, num less than what is it like? I'll just do a September. So let sq equal squirrel dot fave number, and then I'll just do num equals sq dot length, and then this will be num plus plus, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do sq index of num. Should be 0. Sorry, sq of num plus plus, and yeah, everything else with a comment. So now when I console.log out sq, should get me 6, 7. Happy to slack this out to y'all.
Yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, so you need to go. Basically, if you ever want to change anything inside of an array, you need to go through the entire array. On Thursday, we'll talk about another way to go into an array without a for loop, but like you still need to go into the array. Like you can't just do something to the array itself and then think that it will like distribute to every like one of its elements.
Are there methods that do that for you?
Yes.
Those are probably easier to use.
Yes and no. They're. I mean, with any tool like that, like quote unquote, makes something easier, it also takes away a certain level of control. So it's like, you know, if you're trying to use what the tool is designed to do, then yes. But if you want to do something very custom or fancy, no, is like the short of it. Okay, cool. All right, back to objects. Changing a value, yep, that does what it does. Deleting a key value pair. Is this operation called delete? So delete on line 9 there is also a reserved word. We can't have any variables called delete. But, and I'll caveat this, very rarely do you see folks deleting key value pairs. Or rather deleting it. And the reason why is because more often than not, if you have a key value pair that's not used, you just don't use it, right? It's not like an array where like it takes up like a position. You might be like, hey, it throws everything else off by 1. I need to remove it so everything else is in its correct position. Like a key value, like in an object, a key value pair, there's no order. And so a key value pair doesn't really like, it takes up like memory, yes, but like it's almost like not worth deleting, right? You just don't use it. An argument could be made that you want to delete certain key value pairs for security reasons, and that's totally fair, and that's why this operation exists. But I'll just caveat this by saying that like very rarely would you ever have to delete a key value pair unless there's like a very, very explicit use case. The more often approach is, hey, this key value pair is no longer relevant. Okay, great, ignore it. Pretend it doesn't exist, right? It's like you wouldn't go into the dictionary and delete all the words you don't know or you don't use, right? Yeah. So yeah, so we can do it, but it's just not commonly done. Okay, so last 2 slides, and these are things you probably haven't seen yet. The in operator, and then the next one is the for in operator. The in operator is super simple. It's like a Boolean. It's almost like that includes. It basically just tells you, hey, does this object have this key? Okay, and yeah, it will give you back a Boolean as you expect, right? There's only 2 possible scenarios. Either this key exists or it doesn't exist. So quite honestly, not too much else to say about it. Actually, one thing that I don't even know the answer to, but we can easily find out, is, actually just copy this code, okay. Okay, so let's just go to the very bottom here, right? Okay, so let Pusheen equals this cat. We do all of these things. This looks fine. Okay, cool. All right, so this gives us back what we expect, right? Name is a key in Pusheen. Sadness is not. If I make a key called sadness and I put undefined, let's see what happens. Ah, okay, great. So it doesn't check the value, it's checking the key. So I guess that's the important thing to know here, right? So like, it doesn't matter what your value is, even if your value is undefined or null or something else, it still technically exists. this in operator only checks to see if the key exists in the object, as opposed to whether or not the key and the value exists in the object. So yeah.
How would check and see if the key has a value?
How do you check to see the key of the value?
Yeah.
Depends. I guess like it's a little hard here because if you do something like console.log Pushin, and then you do like what sadness, it gives you back undefined, but you can't really tell if that value is undefined or if it's like it is undefined. Although one thing that I will say in JavaScript commonly, undefined is kind of this unique like special like snowflake in the sense that like undefined is its own type. It only has one possible value. And what undefined means is like the computer, or rather, no value has been assigned yet. And so because of that, very rarely do you see people do what I just did, which is actually assign it a value undefined. Like normally you only see undefined when a value has not been assigned. If I wanted to assign a value to denote that, hey, nothing exists here or nothing should exist, basically for human assignment, almost the correct usage is to use null, right? And so that's why null and undefined like both exist in parallel, right? Null means like, hey, like someone looked at it or we looked at it and we're explicitly saying there should not be a value here. Undefined means we have not assigned a value to the thing yet at all, ever, right? And so that's why like a lot of times if you define a variable, like if you just do like let x in JavaScript, the value of x by default is undefined because what it's acknowledging two things. The first thing it acknowledges is that x has been created, and the second thing is acknowledging that no one has given x a value yet, right? No, on the other hand, means x has been created and someone intentionally gave it a value of no, okay? So that just means like very rarely would you ever see someone do that, which is like, hey, let x equal undefined. JavaScript doesn't stop you from doing it, it's just not very commonly done because of what null and undefined both represents. So it's kind of, that's more of like a human use best practice thing. But honestly, like to answer your question, Eric, of how do we check that? On the next slide, we're going to talk about. Nope, not that slide. This one. So I'll come back to the foreign operators. So objects are also a class, right? We see the capital O objects. Objects are also a class in JavaScript, so which means they come with a bunch of built-in tools that help you use objects a lot more easily. And in this case, objects, two of the methods for objects that can be helpful. One is called object.keys, and one is called object.values. The way to use it is usually just pass in the objects you want into object.keys or object.values, and it will give you back an array of all the keys and all of the objects. Obviously, if I give you back an array of all the values, you don't actually know what keys they correspond to, but you just know I have these lists of values. And so, to your question of how do I check to see if a key exists, you can always just check object.keys and see if what you're looking for is in the array. It's a lot harder to check to see if object.values exist because you would need to. It's like once you confirm the key exists, then you would need to figure out what the value is and check to see if that value is in the array, in the object.values array. But even then, it's a little bit wonky because you're not quite sure. It could be like another key that has the same value as you. So you need to do a little bit more kind of thinking around it. There's not like a quick and dirty way to really quickly verify it, right? Especially if that value is undefined. Yes, that's probably the main thing. If the value is anything but undefined, you just go like object.key, right? And it should give you back the value. If the value is undefined, it's a little bit more of a complicated process to figure out like whether or not like that exists properly. Tyler?
Sorry.
Oh. So I mean these are just like kind of two additional things for you to use. Okay, so going back to the in operator here, the in operator in itself just gives you a boolean telling you, hey, this key exists on this object. And once again, only two possible outcomes here. Yep, exactly. It's basically the parallel to the includes method for arrays. Okay, this thing here is probably going to be the bulk of your workshop today. It's something called the for in loop. We know what for is, and we just learned what in is. But conceptually, the way to think about it is, if I gave you an array and I say, hey, can you go through every element in the array? I think most folks are pretty comfortable, going from beginning to end, left to right, going through the array. If an object is a collection of word definitions, right, or key value pairs, what if I want to go through like that object, right? I want to access every single key and every single value. How do I do that? For loop is one tool or one way of doing that. The syntax looks like this, right? So the for part is pretty standard, right? We have open close parentheses. Except here, instead of having like an initializer, having an incrementer, and having like a increment modifier, I guess, we have this phrase like let key in Pusheen. So for each of these words, let is a reserved word. We're basically creating a new variable, right? Like how when we go through an array, we say let I equal 0. Like this is just like that let, right? That means key is what? A variable, right? Key is just a variable, so we can call this whatever we want. We can call it like Julia, we can call it John, we can call it whatever we want, right? So key is super flexible. That's just the name of the variable. We can use anywhere we want there as long as it's not a reserved word. Okay. In is not flexible. We have to use in, right? Because what in does is in denotes like, hey, now we are going to be actually going through the array, right? The in operator checks keys, so now we're actually going in through the object. And then lastly, this last one is Pusheen. This is just the name of the object. So we're making the assumption that this is a variable that represents an object. Okay. So when we look at like for let key in Pusheen, the let and the in are reserved words. We cannot touch those. The key we can call whatever we want because that's just a random variable that we're pulling out of thin air. And then the in, and then the Pusheen part is the object that we're actually going through. Okay. What this does is this will go through this. When you use this loop, if you notice what we're doing here, all we're doing is one thing. We're doing is Pusheen's key is Pusheen key, right? And when we do it, you'll see that it's a loop, right? So it does something multiple times. What it does is it executes like that code block between basically just line 10 for every single key value pair in the object for you. Okay. A few things I know people get really hung up on here, right? One is objects by definition have no sense of order. Okay. Like with an array, we can say like this element comes first, then this, then this. An object, you want to think of it almost as if every single key value pair is on an even playing field. Doesn't matter when they got created; they're all even. They're all like all have the same priority level. If order does matter to you, that means you should use an array. Okay, so objects you use objects with the intention that the order does not matter. Okay, and so because order does not matter, when you use this loop, what this loop will do is it will go through every single key value pair for you, but you can't really make an assumption about the order in which it will do so. You just know that this will cover every single key value pair. Okay, and that also means if you don't want to go through every single key value pair, if you only want to go through certain keys or if you only want to go through certain key value pairs, then you don't use this tool, right? So I guess Tyler, to your point, like a lot of tools make your life easier, yes, but they also come with these restrictions, right? So like this restriction is you have to go through everything, and you can't really make any assumptions about the order in which you're going to be going through them. Okay, and so in each iteration of the loop, what you basically have is, remember how I said object.keys gave you back an array of keys? This just says, great, for every single one of those keys, what do you want me to do, right? In this case, we have a variable called key in every iteration of the loop. And so we just say Pusheen's key, Pusheen's name, age, color, is Pusheen's, the value for that key in Pusheen, right? So Pusheen's age is Pusheen age, which is 7. So we have 7. Pusheen's name is Pusheen, so we have Pusheen here, and then gray and tabby for the color as well, right? Like the for in loop lets you access every single key value pair by giving you access to every single key. Once you have every single key, you also have access to every single value, right? It's like if I wanted to know everything that was in a dictionary, I don't necessarily need every single word and definition. I just need to know what all the words are. Because once I have all the words, I can just look up the definitions for those words. Okay? Does this make sense? you'll be using a lot of this in your workshop. So like so this is going to be like the bulk of it, right? And it kind of makes sense if you really think about it, because for the most part, like, you know, with object, like, I guess if you know exactly what you're looking for, you can just go through and edit directly. But for a lot of cases, you're going through a lot of things like simultaneously. Right? You're just like, oh, add this object, which is like a list of 40 things. I want to do something to all of them. I want to check all of them. Like, this is the way to do it, or one of the more comprehensive ways to do it. Okay. Any questions on for and loops? Cool. That should be it. Sorry, one more slide on it. Oh, actually, no, this is the same slide. So this is telling you that it will loop through all the keys. And then object.keys. And oh, right, nested arrays. This is just to let you know that with an array, we can store nested arrays. And lo and behold, with an objects, we can also store nested objects. So in the same way that when we accessed nested arrays, we did like one bracket notation, then another bracket notation, then bracket notation, with the assumption that after each bracket notation, we're giving you back an array that you can access with another bracket notation. Same idea here. In the example, we're using dot notation here, but we could easily use bracket notation there as well. The idea is that like with nested objects, like we have one object, we access the value of it. If that value happens to be an object, we can just chain together the next key or the next key that we care about. And so in this case, we have Pusheen. Pusheen is an object. It has the siblings key. Siblings value is an object too. So if I want to access, Stormy or Pip, it's just Pusheen.siblings, which gives me back the siblings value object, and then I can just chain together that dot sister, which gives me the Stormy string or name. So it works identically to how we access things for arrays. And remember how like a while back, or not back like 2 days ago, we did type of arrays and it was an object. Like you can kind of see how like arrays are really built on top of objects, right? Like performance-wise, how we use it, how it's stored or how it's constructed, it's very, very similar to arrays, or vice versa, whatever. But yeah, cool. So that's the section on arrays. Yeah, or sorry, on objects.
If you weren't going to do the dot, you would just have machine and then brackets, siblings, bracket, sister.
Yep, exactly. So this, yeah. So it will look something like. It would be Pusheen, and then with bracket notation, we need to specify it's a string and not a. So we know it's not a variable, so it just looks like that now. Yep.
So they're next to each other rather than nested.
What do you mean?
The brackets, like the sister doesn't go inside the brackets that siblings is in. It goes
Right. Yeah. So like how like with a nested array, like it's not nested in arrays either, right? In arrays, we do something like this, same exact idea. Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to be cute, like feel free to do this too. It's kind of obnoxious, but whatever. Like this works, right? Like once again, JavaScript says I'm just gonna do whatever it is you tell me to do, unless I break or unless you tell me to do something that I'm not allowed to do, right? So like this is totally valid.
If you were to use a for in and one of the keys with an object, what would come out?
Keys cannot be objects. Keys are only strings ever.
Yeah, you're right. What is that I'm trying to say? If the value is an object, is that what I'm trying to say? Go back to this previous slide,
Sure.
The one where you had the, yeah, that one.
If the value is an
The value of siblings is
Yep.
an object.
Yep.
So if you were to do a for in, would the key come out as an object?
It would just be something like this. Like let's say we'll call it inner key in. We'll call it Pusheen.siblings. Right? Because
Yeah.
remember how like the way it's constructed, it's like this fourth thing should just be an object. Right? Like JavaScript makes no prescriptions around like what you call it, right? Like as long as that thing evaluates to an object, you're good.
Right. What I was suggesting though is if you did not have dot siblings, and you had let key in Pusheen, and one of the values happened to be an object, would it come out in the console.log as stating it as an object with the values in it, with the object, with the keys and values within that?
Right. So for a for loop, like that's all you need for a for loop, right? Like, and that will do is that will give you every single key. What you want to do with the value, the code doesn't care, right? So if I just say, if I want to just console log out, so let's comment out all of this. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so if I want to just console.log out key, okay, that's all this does, right? If I want to console log out Pusheen, if I want to console log out the value, then I do that, right?
There we go. Okay.
But like, but at that point, like, I'm just treating it like I would any other object, right? Like, the fact that it's an object does not impact the for loop at all, right? Because for loop only cares about the keys. The value can be anything you want, and this loop does not care.
How would we access like Stormy or Pip in that loop?
Define access.
So like right now it's giving us the entire object. Is there a way to get the values within the object? Like right now we're giving the values machine 7.
You can probably do something like what? Like if oh yeah, let's do type of. If type of Pusheen key equals object, we can console log out Pusheen key. No, wait.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, this. If I can't do this, I shouldn't be teaching this class. Here's something like that. Object.values Pusheen key, and that gives you back an array of all the values.
Can you just go through that?
Sure.
It's very solid.
Yep. So for loop, this means we're going through every single key in the Pusheen. And then actually, let me add a few more console logs here to just make it really easy on the printouts. Console.log out key, and I'll do the same for value as well. I know CodePen doesn't make it easy to do console logs. REPL makes it a lot easier. Do console logs, like as we were learning, they're so helpful. Like otherwise, you're just kind of guessing, pretty much. Like, and then if you do console logs, like pro tip, make it like really easy to read on yourself, because I mean that's what you're doing console logs anyway, right? Like I like to add like, especially when I do loops, I like to add like a random string like that. So when I print out whatever it is, oh, what did I do? Oh, haha, ob value doesn't exist. Okay. Because when I print out things in a row, they get really like messy. So when I print out like something like a bunch of asterisks, it actually breaks it out for me really nicely. So what this code is basically doing here, let me zoom out a little bit. Great. Okay. So what this code is doing here is the for let key in Pusheen, right? This loop. Ignore this if statement for now, right? Because if it may or may not be met, right? By default, it's logging the key, logging the value for that key, and then logging these asterisks. So whenever I see an asterisk, it means I'm moving on to the next iteration. I'm moving on to the new key value pair, right? So I look at key, it's Pusheen. Age 7. Siblings, the value is this object. Okay. What this if statement is saying is, hey, if the type of value is an object, okay, console log out all the values of that value. Well, the value is an object, which is this thing here, sister Stormy, brother Pip. That's an object, right? So what are all the values of that object? Well, one of the fastest ways to get all the values of an object is just to the object class has a built-in function .values, and all I gotta do is feed it in an object, and it will give me back all the values for that object, right? So if Pusheen Key is this object with sister Stormy, brother Pip, if I gave it to this object .values function and say give back all the values, it would just give me back an array with the values, Stormy and Pip. And yeah, I think I already shared this repo, so you all should have access to it too. Right, and notice how only this one has this extra printout here, right? Because for the other two, the type of value for this one is a string, the type of value for the age is a number, and the type of value for siblings is an object. And so because of that, this if clause triggers, and we're logging out this. Yeah, Dimitri?
Like with arrays, we had a thing to check if it's an array or not, like array is array.
Yeah.
Similar thing with objects.
Like I said, like usually like you just like I mean type of will probably do most of what you need to do. If I need to differentiate like whether or not this is an array versus an object, I'll probably just check to see if type of equals object and array.isArray is false. Right? So it's more like you're like eliminating everything that's not an array or not an object as opposed to looking for directly like an object. Right? Because like an array is technically an object if you go down low enough in JavaScript. So is like almost all non-primitives. So because of that, it's a little bit like well, array is an object, so you really shouldn't be filtering out. It's more like you want to know when something not an array. Yeah. Yeah. So the short answer is there's not like a really, at least I'm not aware of any like really quick, elegant way to do it. But that also speaks to the point that like there's usually not a strong reason to do that in the first place. Usually speaking. Actually, let's see if this makes it a little bit easier. I just had a variable called let value equal this. And then hopefully this makes the code a little easier to read now too. All right, cool. Any other questions on objects? Yeah, just remember, the for loop doesn't care about values. The for loop only gives you all the keys. Once you have the key, it is up to you to get the value. Okay, that's just the last reminder I'll give on that topic. Cool. All right. That went really long.